This hearing of the Committee on Agriculture entitled The Next Farm Bill, Conservation Policy will come to order. I almost want to say I'm back, but that's beside the point. Let me turn to myself for an opening statement. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing. For some of us, it's hard to believe it's already Farm Bill time again. And to some degree, it feels like we just finished hashing out the details of the last Farm Bill. But it's true that we're already entering the fourth year of the Agricultural Act of 2014, and that means we must now set about the hard work of preparing for the next Farm Bill. As Chairman Conaway noted at the Rural Economic Outlook hearing 2 weeks ago, we are entering this Farm Bill reauthorization against a much different backdrop. Net farm income has been cut in half over the past 4 years, the steepest four-year percentage decline since the start of the Great Depression. And I've noted before, we write farm bills for the bad times, not the good times, and our nation's farmers and ranchers currently are struggling with that as we speak. While the 2014 Farm Bill has been vital in responding to the needs of the countryside, we revisit the Farm Bill and all farm bills roughly every 5 years to make sure that they are attuned to the current conditions in the countryside. To that end, we're starting our important aspect of this work this morning. Over the course of the next month, each subcommittee will hold hearings focusing on the portions of the Farm Bill that fall under their respective jurisdictions. Each subcommittee is going to ask stakeholders to give us their Farm Bill ideas sooner rather than later. And as an Oklahoma State graduate, it's difficult for me to say that. Nonetheless, inside joke. Today, we're focusing on the nation's voluntary conservation initiatives. These initiatives have undergone many changes over the past 2 decades, during which time I served as chairman and ranking member, respectfully, of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over the conservation title, and then as chairman of the full committee. Once again, I have the pleasure to serve in a familiar role as we begin this process. I take conservation policy very seriously. My dedication to conservation comes from being raised by folks who lived through the drought and the Dust Bowl of the 1930s and the drought of the 1950s, both of which caused some of the hardest times rural America has ever experienced. As a Western Oklahoma farmer, I've also seen firsthand the important role conservation plays in making sure that a Dust Bowl never happens again. While this committee cannot control the weather, we can provide our farmers and ranchers the tools necessary to protect and conserve not only the land, but also their way of life. Congress has acknowledged this over the past 20 years by making significant investments in conservation policy. We expanded our commitment to important initiatives like CRP and EQIP, while also creating new tools like CSP to expand the use of on-farm conservation practices. The conservation title of the 2014 Farm Bill answered the call for meaningful deficit reduction, saving taxpayers $6 billion by consolidating 23 programs into 13, further streamlining and targeting delivery to farmers, ranchers, and foresters. I'm proud of the work that we've accomplished over the years, and I'm proud of the work of the farmers, ranchers, and forest owners who implement these important conservation practices. I think the results speak for themselves. Voluntary conservation works. That said, I understand that no policy is perfect, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about how these critical tools can be improved to address new natural resource challenges. Thanks to all of our witnesses who've taken time from their work and families to join us today. We appreciate your efforts and your willingness to share your thoughts on the future of the conservation policy. I would be remiss if I didn't note that I am delighted to be partnered with my ranking member in this endeavor on this committee, Mrs. Fudge. Mrs. Fudge, we had quite the set of adventures in the 2012, 13, and 14 Farm Bill process, and I look forward to working with her in every way. With that, I would like to yield to the ranking member for any opening remarks that she would like to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here this morning. I'm really excited to be here today for our first Conservation and Forestry Subcommittee hearing and for the opportunity to work with my good friend, Chairman Lucas, as we get to work on the next Farm Bill. Conservation programs are a staple of the Farm Bill and play an invaluable role in preserving our agricultural landscapes across the country. Farmers are the original conservationists. Their livelihood is tied to the land, and it is in their best interest that their land be the healthiest, most productive, and most resilient it can be. Farm Bill conservation programs help our producers accomplish just that while compounding benefit after benefit to deliver cleaner air, cleaner water, and helping address some of our nation's most pressing natural resource concerns. The last Farm Bill consolidated some conservation programs with the goal of making the programs easier for producers to use and easier for NRCS to manage. I'm interested to hear today how those changes are working and if indeed they have made the programs easier to use and administer. The 2014 Farm Bill's conservation title also saved almost $4 billion over 10 years. This was a substantial cut initiated by the committee as part of the overall Farm Bill savings. Further cuts to these programs as part of the upcoming Farm Bill would significantly hamstring the efforts to achieve our conservation goals. I'm also looking forward to hearing how our tried and true conservation programs like EQIP, CSP, CRP, and easement programs are working and how they can work better for producers on the ground. Finally, and I know some of our witnesses will touch on this today, I'm interested to hear how the new Regional Conservation Partnership Program is working. This program was an effort to give more flexibility on the ground and leverage our federal dollars to bring more non-federal resources to our conservation needs. I want to thank the witnesses, and I especially want to thank my good friend, Chairman Lucas. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair notes that the subcommittee is privileged and pleased that we have both the chairman of the full committee and the ranking member in attendance today. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Conover, would you have any opening comments to make?
Just that I want to thank both yourself and the ranking member for kicking off this series of subcommittee hearings. You're all the first ones to start. All the subcommittees will have hearings over the next couple of months covering their areas of jurisdiction. And I look forward to your both of y'all's able leadership in this endeavor, and look forward to the hearing. So, with that,
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the ranking member for any comments he might make.
Well, thank you, Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Fudge, for holding today's hearing to review conservation policy. And we'll be hearing from a great panel of witnesses today, so welcome to them, to the committee. At the committee's recent hearing on the farm economy, I expect my intent, at least on my part, to take a good look at the CRP program and try to see if we can simplify and reform and increase the program acres in that program. We lowered the cap on CRP in the 2014 Farm Bill, even though I really didn't want to do that, but we were losing the acres anyway. And if we wouldn't have lowered the cap, the money would have disappeared, so we used that money to protect the conservation baseline and help offset some cuts in other programs in Title II. But now, given what's going on around the country, I think it's time for us to figure out how to get back to 40 million acres of CRP in this Farm Bill. This increase will help improve water quality, address the declining wildlife populations that we've experienced in my region of the country. CRP, the big track CRP, worked. We boomed with pheasants and ducks and deer and other wildlife because of it. But it's been diminished because of economics. I think because of a emphasis on some of these carve-outs that have been put in there to satisfy everybody's idea. And the general sign-up has become a stepchild in the program. And that's the opposite of what I think needs to be done. So I'd like to see us increase the acres, but if we don't reform this program, I'm not going to support increasing the acres. That's how strongly I feel about it. So I'm going to be looking for ways to make CRP less complicated, to make the rental rates more affordable for the budget and also more competitive, so we're not losing farmers aren't losing their land to CRP. And I'm also interested in steps that we can take to bring the program up to date by getting rid of the requirement that was originally put in, because the program originally was to get land out of production, to raise prices. And so we still have in place the fact that you have to have base acres and program acres in order to get into the program. I don't think that's necessary anymore or right. So I'd like to see us get rid of that. So by and large, I think the Farm Bill conservation programs are working. As was said, we simplified some of these other programs in the last bill. This time it's time for us, in my opinion, to take a good look at CRP and simplify that program as well. So I'm looking forward to today's witnesses, and thank the chair for allowing me to spout off, and I yield back.
Gentleman is timid as always. Thank the ranking member. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to the table. First, Mr. Chuck Coffey, Double C Cattle Company, Davis, Oklahoma, on behalf of the National Cattlemen's Association. Also, Mr. Tim Gertson, a member of the USA Rice Federation Board of Directors, Lizzie, Texas? Lizzie. And Mr. Jeffrey Peters, a Chief Executive Officer, National Association of Conservation Districts, Washington, D.C., on behalf of Mr. Lee McDaniel, who may be under the weather, correct, Mr. Peters? Mr. David Nomsen, Vice President of Government Affairs, Pheasants Forever, Garfield, Minnesota, and Mr. John Piotti, President, American Farmland Trust, Washington, D.C. And with that, Mr. Coffey, you're recognized for 5 minutes. We have these wondrous lights, green, yellow, red. Proceed, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Fudge. We sincerely appreciate your recognition of agriculture's important contribution to our nation's lands. Good morning. My name is Chuck Coffey. Ruth, my wife of 30 years, and I operate a fifth-generation cattle ranch in south central Oklahoma, where we own and operate over 30,000 acres of grassland, rangeland. I am testifying before you today representing the many cattle producers who each have a stake in protecting the environment. U.S. cattlemen own and manage considerably more land than any other segment of agriculture. In fact, we manage some 1/3 of the nation's total land mass. Since our livelihood is made on the land, the utilization of our natural resources and being good stewards of the land not only makes good environmental sense, it is fundamental for our industry to remain strong. We strive to operate as environmentally friendly as possible, and it is through voluntary conservation programs that ranchers will continue to be proud partners with the government to reach our environmental conservation goals. Ranching in south central Oklahoma comes with its fair share of difficulties, as it does for many fellow cattlemen across the country. However, we have been able to keep our operations sustainable during those hard times by utilizing voluntary conservation programs and applying management practices that enhance our operation. Drought is a common problem in south central Oklahoma and requires adaptability and forward thinking to maintain the resources we have on the ranch. In 2011 and 2012, we were challenged with one of the worst droughts in a generation. It was similar to the droughts of the 50s and the droughts of the 30s, but praise the Lord, Mr. Lucas, we didn't have a dust bowl situation due to the conservation practices that we have on the ground. However, we survived and remained sustainable because of our grazing management practices and the opportunity to work with NRCS's voluntary conservation programs. One way we made our ranch drought resistant is by installing solar wells and above-ground water storage systems and even piping water to some critical areas, this water serving both the needs of livestock and wildlife that inhabit our lands. We graze our cattle with a carefully managed grazing plan developed with the assistance of the NRCS. Through cooperation with state and local agencies, in addition to the development of innovative grazing strategies, we have increased perennial grasses on our ranch, improved ground cover, greatly reduced soil erosion, and ensured adequate forage for livestock and wildlife. Another key to improving the grasses on our ranch is brush control, which we often do in partnership with NRCS when funds are available. We use a variety of ways to reduce brush, including prescribed burns and mechanical treatment. Conservation programs that keep land in production and do not limit its use are best for both ranchers and conserving our nation's resources. That is why the Working Lands program, in my opinion, works best for ranchers. One such program, CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, rewards those of us that have been conservationists and have spent both time and money improving our land, water, and wildlife habitats. CSP offers cattlemen the opportunity to earn payments for actively managing, maintaining, and expanding conservation practices. NRCS personnel are a tremendous resource for ranchers. In recent years, local NRCS personnel have been prevented from going to training sessions provided by the Society for Range Management, the Grassland Conservation Initiative meetings, and it's also become more difficult, in my opinion, for them to find time to get out of the office due to the tremendous amounts of paperwork that they are required to keep up with. We as ranchers must have well-informed NRCS personnel on the ground with us to move forward with these innovative conservation practices. As Congress begins to process the next Farm Bill, I have a few recommendations on how to make these programs work even better for producers. NRCS needs to work on streamlining the application process to be able to garner more participation in the program. CSP, for example, needs to be simplified based on outcomes and adaptive management rather than a prescribed set of management practices. The biggest point I'd like you to take away from this hearing is that the voluntary part of the conservation program is what really makes it work for ranchers. If they were to become mandatory, the rules and regs that farmers and ranchers would be subjected to would make it harder for them to utilize the unique conservation practices that help their individual operations thrive. USDA's conservation programs have been a great asset to cattle producers, and it is important that these programs be implemented in a practical, producer-friendly, and voluntary manner to ensure that cattlemen can continue to responsibly produce the world's safest, most nutritious, and affordable source of protein. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today, and thank you for your time and would welcome any questions moving forward.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman
Coffey.
Lucas.
Mr. Gertson, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Gertson.
Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Fudge, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this hearing today, and I appreciate the opportunity to offer testimony on behalf of the USA Rice Federation. My name is Timothy Gertson, and I own and operate G5 Farms along with my cousin. We are fifth-generation rice farmers and first began farming independently of our parents in 2009. We farm in and around Lissy, Texas, a small community about an hour outside of Houston. On our farm, we normally begin planting rice March 1st, and if you take a look at the calendar, you'll see that's tomorrow. But here I am in a suit and tie in D.C., 1,500 miles from home. That's because the issue of conservation is critically important to me and my family. With my testimony today, I'd like to focus on the importance of investments in working lands programs, specifically EQIP, CSP, and the RCPP. Rice is the only commodity that is 100% irrigated, with many growers dependent on groundwater. It's necessary to flood our fields during the growing season, and we have the option and opportunity to maintain those floods throughout the winter to benefit the millions of migratory waterfowl passing through. Winter flooded rice fields provide many of the same functions for migrating waterfowl as natural wetlands. The close relationship between rice and waterfowl led to historic partnership between USA Rice and Ducks Unlimited. The Rice Stewardship Partnership has unified us around our common goals in working lands conservation programs and the theme, what's good for rice is good for ducks. Since the partnership was formed, we've worked together to secure $25 million through 3 different RCPP projects from NRCS to implement EQIP and CSP projects across all 6 rice-growing states and to construct a small reservoir near my hometown in Eagle Lake to benefit waterfowl and rice farmers when we experience drought. USA Rice would like to see the continuation of RCPP as part of the next Farm Bill. CSP, and especially EQIP, are referred to by farmers as the workhorses of NRCS conservation programs. They are valuable cost-share programs that incentivize implementation of conservation practices that have proven benefits to the environment. My father and his brothers can attest as some of the earliest adopters of both programs on our family operation. Many rice farmers operate on rented cropland. These cost-share programs allow land renters to install conservation measures while footing only a portion of the cost. Improvements in efficiencies benefit the farmer, while the environmental perks benefit the landowner, simultaneously raising the land value. We heard there was a huge demand for the EQIP program when we got our first contract in 2010, and we soon learned why, as the results came quickly and our input costs dropped significantly. We cost-shared the installation of more than 4 miles of pipeline to replace irrigation canals, resulting in up to 20% less water used, providing both instant savings and environmental benefits. What previously took 24 hours of pumping to start just a trickle of water into my fields is now on demand and immediate. After we implemented our initial EQIP contracts, we saw the returns and we decided to do more of it. Due to backlogs, we paid for it out of pocket. I think NRCS conservation programs not only incentivize conservation, but they help farmers develop an appetite to continue the environmental stewardship, making their full value truly incalculable. Throughout rural America, working lands programs serve as economic drivers. It takes more than just a single farmer to complete the work needed to implement an EQIP or CSP contract. Not to mention the land is still in production, keeping small communities like mine thriving. Unlike some programs like CRP that pay farmers not to grow a crop. More than 75% of rice farming operations in the South operate in what USDA calls strike force counties, rural counties with more than 20% of the population below the poverty line. Small towns like mine rely on the agriculture industry for jobs. My operation alone provides jobs to the folks in my town, and the revenue generated from my farm is reinvested in inputs for the following year and ends up in the hands of small local businesses. A new study by Texas A&M's Agriculture and Food Policy Center drives this home, showing every U.S. farmer on average is generating $1 million annually for their local economy. I've talked a lot about what the industry is doing, the benefits working lands conservation brings to local economies, and why these investments pay off for our taxpayers. But now I want to talk about the real reason I'm here. I've got 3 boys at home, ages 5, 3, and 1, and they all want to be farmers just like Dad. They want to work the same ground that my family's worked for the last 108 years. But without being able to maintain the natural resources and keep my land in production, there won't be anything left to hand to the 6th generation. That's why I'm here, is to ask this subcommittee and the full Ag Committee membership to support robust funding for the conservation title and to focus that support on important working land investments so that my children can play a part in feeding this great nation. Thank you for your leadership and the opportunity to offer testimony. I look forward to working with you and your staff and to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gertson. Mr. Peters, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Fudge, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. I'm Jeremy Peters, Chief Executive Officer for the National Association of Conservation Districts, standing in for our immediate past president, Lee McDaniel, who is unable to attend today's hearing. We appreciate your flexibility in allowing me to testify this morning. I've been involved with NACD since 2006 and became the association's Chief Executive Officer in April of 2015. But my roots are in agriculture and my family's farm in rural southwestern Virginia, where we continue raising cattle today. NACD represents America's 3,000 conservation districts and the 17,000 men and women who serve on their governing boards, as well as their respective state and territory associations. Conservation districts are local units of government established under state law to carry out natural resource management programs at the local level. Conservation districts work with cooperating landowners and operators in all 50 states, as well as the territories. They help manage and protect land and water resources on private working lands and many public lands in the United States. Conservation districts are vital to conservation in this country. Working with partners at USDA, they provide on-the-ground conservation planning, technical expertise, and scientific assistance to implement conservation practices tailored to the landowner's management goals. Conservation districts are also unique since they are directly involved in the local working group process, which informs NRCS about what the greatest resource concerns are at the local level. So what's the point? As NACD began its Farm Bill evaluation process last year, we created a Farm Bill task force to guide our policy priorities. We first created a Farm Bill survey to seek input and opinion from our members on the last Farm Bill, what programs were working or needed improvements, and where they wanted NACD to focus. Based upon the over 500 responses we received, the task force developed a set of principles that was officially adopted by NACD's Board of Directors at our annual meeting earlier this month. And those principles are attached to the written testimony that was submitted to the committee. These principles focus on items like local input and the need for investments in Farm Bill conservation programs. While not directly authorized under the Farm Bill, all of the programs discussed in my testimony would not be as successful without the technical and scientific expertise provided through Conservation Technical Assistance, or CTA. Through the CTA program, landowners work with local conservation professionals, including conservation district employees, to develop individual conservation plans, ensuring producers know they are implementing the best conservation practices to meet their individual land's resource needs and that taxpayers are getting the most out of their investment. Successful implementation of on-the-ground conservation is also dependent on proper investment through Farm Bill conservation title. The financial and technical assistance that Farm Bill dollars provide are the lifeblood of the voluntary conservation model. Without this funding, we would see less adoption of conservation practices, and in turn, we would see fewer conservation benefits. The last Farm Bill reduced conservation spending by almost $6 billion over 10 years, when including sequestration. While NACD and the larger agriculture and conservation community understood the budgetary constraints that Congress had to deal with when writing the last Farm Bill, the cuts to the conservation title were significant. These funding reductions in EQIP, CSP, CRP, and ASEP have dramatically limited the ability to put conservation on the ground. We recommend that Congress seriously look at not only maintaining funding for the conservation title, but we strongly recommend increasing it. Demands on the landscape and our natural resources are greater than ever. And in these difficult financial times for farmers and ranchers, it's unrealistic to think that landowners will take on costly conservation practices with fewer financial incentives and less technical assistance. That is why it is even more important to double down on Farm Bill conservation funding. While there are several programs worth discussing during my testimony, one I would like to focus on is the new Regional Conservation Partnership Program. RCPP was created to bring together new partners and help leverage non-federal dollars to achieve greater conservation outcomes. Conservation districts and their close working relationships with landowners have been natural partners in many of these projects. In fact, 25 out of the 88 projects funded in the most recent round of awards were led by conservation districts or their state associations. As with all programs, RCPP needs to be thoroughly evaluated while writing the next Farm Bill. Even in new programs, the locally led aspect of the conservation delivery system is crucial to ensuring that conservation programs are focused on the greatest resource concerns in a particular area. Unfortunately, RCPP does not always fully take that into account, and the local conservation practices established by the local working groups. Greater emphasis on state and local coordination and consultation with local conservation districts is needed to ensure that these programs are indeed addressing the greatest resource concerns. An additional obstacle is the SAM and DUNS reporting requirements. Current law requires landowners who participate in NRCS cost share programs to follow time-consuming federal reporting requirements. These requirements can act as a barrier to implementing conservation practices on the ground. NACD does not believe farmers and ranchers were the intended recipient of this regulation, and thankfully, Congresswoman Custer and Congressman Crawford introduced the Improving Access to Conservation Act to fix this problem. NACD encourages the committee to ensure its passage or its inclusion in the Farm Bill. While there are many issues that we will discuss today, the bottom line is that our nation's conservation districts and the locally led conservation delivery system continue to be effective in communities all across the nation. For this to continue, Congress must provide robust funding and continue the tradition of a locally led conservation system. We cannot let our nation's investment in Farm Bill conservation programs continue to erode. And as this committee begins reauthorizing the next Farm Bill, we appreciate the opportunity to provide our insights and expertise. We look forward to a Farm Bill that will continue to provide the ability for landowners to conserve our nation's soil, water, and wildlife for future generations. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognized for 5 minutes, Mr. Nomsen.
Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Fudge, members of the subcommittee, my name is Dave Nomsen with Pheasants Forever, and Mr. Chairman, I had the same thought when I sat down here this morning too. As you sat down, I thought about I'm back. And I am here once again to talk primarily about the Conservation Reserve Program this morning. But I do want to start by pointing out there is an incredible entire suite of conservation programs that we work with across the country. But frankly, CRP has been this nation's most successful conservation program at USDA. Let's look back a little bit and start by looking at the period from 1990 to 2010. During that period, the CRP averaged about 32 or 33 million acres enrolled in the program. During that time period, we had an authorization for basically a 40 million acre program. It was dinged a little bit here and there. It was 39.2, it was 36.4, but basically a 40 million acre program. And quite frankly, the program worked quite well at that time. We had some good old days for pheasant hunting. We had record pheasant harvests in a number of states, and frankly, we'd like to return to those days, and that's why Pheasants Forever, we're calling once again for an authorization for a 40 million acre program. We hit a bit of a train wreck starting in the, after the 2010 period. And actually, right now, if you look at the northern Great Plains states, perhaps Montana, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and Kansas, if you look at those states, they had 16.4 million acres of CRP in 2007. Today, they have 9.3. 43% of those acres are gone. That grassland has left the landscape, and pheasants and other ground nesting birds, obviously grassland habitats are critical. Between that and then what happened with the 49th general sign-up results, we're actually saying we are at a grassland conservation crisis in much of this country. And we really need to reestablish CRP as the flagship program with a 40 million acre authorization. During that sign-up period, some 26,000 offers were made, and unfortunately, because of the severely reduced cap, 21,000 offers were rejected. Landowners from all across the country that wanted to do good things for soil, water, and wildlife conservation, and they weren't allowed entrance into the program. Mr. Chairman, in your state of Oklahoma, you came out right the national average, about 600 offers, 22% acceptance rate. Basically, 4 out of 5 people were denied entrance into the program. In the flagship state of South Dakota, about 42,000 acres were offered. During the process, USDA accepted 2 offers on 101 acres. Frankly, that just can't continue into the future, and it threatens the integrity and the future of the program. That's why one of the things I'm calling for is a complete reevaluation, revamping of both the sign-up process, sign-up period. We simply have to find ways to put those larger tracts of grass back on that landscape that are important for wildlife production and for hunting. We also need to take a look at the other end of the process. During the last Farm Bill, we had some really, really strong report language that encouraged expiring CRP to be redirected into many of the other conservation programs. It didn't happen. We've got to find a way to make that happen. The program will only continue if it does evolve and it becomes the robust, dynamic program as acres flow through the program. We maintain the benefits, and we go out and capture new acres and new involvement in the program as well. One of the ways to do that, too, is we're going to have to take a look at looking at the historic distribution of acres as part of the sign-up process. It just simply can't just keep bouncing around the country here and there with a number of different factors. We'd like to see, for example, South Dakota go back to about 1.5 million acres in the program. That's not going to happen with the current system that we have in place, and the same thoughts apply to many of those other states that I spoke about earlier. We have a number of other priorities at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, and we're going to be looking forward to working with you and the members of the committee on the easement programs, on working land programs, especially the EQIP program where we do good things in the West. We're going to continue to support strong conservation policies like conservation compliance linked to crop insurance, like the sod saver provisions to help protect native prairies. And our nation's sportsmen and sportswomen are really interested in continuing the VPA HIP Open Fields program to help landowners provide voluntary access for hunters and fishers. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify this morning, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, sir. The chair now recognizes Mr. Piotti for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Fudge, members of the committee. My name's John Piotti, and I'm the President and CEO of American Farmland Trust, AFT. Though I'm new to AFT, I've worked on farming issues in my home state of Maine for the last 25 years, much of that time as part of an organization that worked to protect farmland and support farmers. And thus I have firsthand, on-the-ground experience with many of the programs within the Farm Bill. I want to thank the committee for seeking input from stakeholders on the priorities for the next Farm Bill at this time. For 36 years, AFT has been dedicated to protecting America's farmland and ranchland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. In the United States, we lose the equivalent of 40 acres of farmland to development every hour. Replacing our farmland with homes or shopping centers has ripple effects for our society, from eroding rural towns and their traditions to decreasing our ability to provide our citizens with healthy food, to losing wildlife populations through habitat destruction. AFT recognizes that farmers and ranchers hold the solutions to many of our most pressing environmental problems when they implement voluntary conservation practices on their land. Finally, AFT is concerned with the decreasing number of farmers and their increasing age. In the time since AFT's founding, the average age of farmers has increased from 50 to 58 years, while the number of beginning farmers decreased by 20% in the last agricultural census. The Farm Bill's conservation title should, and at its best does, address all these issues. AFT views the conservation title as a set of tools to address the complex needs of America's farmers and ranchers, while at the same time addressing public interests. One of AFT's goals for the upcoming Farm Bill is to ensure that we retain a full set of tools and that we fund each program adequately. My written testimony provides detail about how the 2014 Farm Bill voluntarily reduced spending in an effort to reduce future deficits. The conservation title saw a 10% decrease in funding levels, or nearly $6 billion in cuts. A recent CBO study shows that the entire Farm Bill will result in nearly $100 billion in deficit reduction. My point on all of this is that the farm and food community has already done its part and should not be the target of additional cuts with the next Farm Bill. Although AFT sees great value in all of the programs in the conservation title, my remarks today, offered here early in the Farm Bill process, focus on two programs that benefit working lands and that AFT has strongly been involved with, and that's ASEP and RCPP. I'll start with ASEP, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which is the Farm Bill's program for protecting farmland, a necessary part of our nation's infrastructure. Protecting farmland from development protects the foundation of our agriculture and our agriculture-related industries. Protecting farmland means protecting wildlife habitat, water tables, and carbon that's stored in our soils. Protecting farmland means protecting our supply of healthy food. And protecting farmland means protecting the way of life in rural America and ensuring that the next generation of farmers can enter the profession. Simply put, federal investment in farmland protection through ASEP provides vital benefits for Americans today and into the future. Allow me to take just a minute to further explain one of the many benefits of ASEP, which some people may not be familiar with. We don't always talk about farmland protection playing a critical role in making land more affordable for farmers, both existing farmers who are looking to expand and beginning farmers who are trying to enter the profession. And yet, in any part of this country where there are significant development pressures, protected farmland is often the only farmland that farmers can afford. I earlier mentioned that the number of beginning farmers dropped by 20% in the last agricultural census. That's a national statistic. It doesn't play out in every region. In my home state of Maine, for instance, our story could not be more different. Between 2007 and 2012, the number of beginning farmers in Maine grew by an impressive 39%. And one of the key reasons is that Maine, during this period, significantly increased its farmland protection efforts, creating affordable options for entering farmers to acquire land. Despite the many benefits of protecting working agricultural lands, the funding for ASEP saw a huge decrease in the 2014 Farm Bill. The three components that were created in that Farm Bill to create ASEP, Wetlands Reserve, FFRP, and the Grassland Reserve programs, these were funded at an average of $732 million a year from 2009 to 2012. Yet the average for ASAP for 2014 through 2018 is $405 million. Even more alarming is that ASEP funding drops to $250 million annually in 2018 and going forward. So listen to what I just said. We're talking about going from $732 million to $250 million, a huge drop. And already, without that last step, NRCS is only funding about 30% of the applicants. Think what it's going to be with the next drop in 2018. Now, in addition to ensuring adequate funding for ASEP, AFT believes there's a need to streamline the program to ease administrative burdens going forward. This would save the federal government significant time and money while making the process easier and more timely for a broad variety of farmers and ranchers. AFT is discussing with advocacy organizations, land trusts.
Summarize, Mr. Piotti?
Yes.
Can you summarize, please?
Yes,
We can get to
absolutely.
questions.
In conclusion, I just want to say the conservation title is vitally important, not just for farmers and ranchers, but for all Americans. It gives our farmers and ranchers a variety of tools to achieve cleaner air and water, healthier soils, more wildlife habitat, and to protect farmland and ranchland. While we all acknowledge the budget realities that the nation faces, we believe that adequate funding for the conservation title is critical at this time. Beyond this, these voluntary conservation programs help our nation's farmers and ranchers advance environmental goals without burdensome regulatory requirements, something that's needed today more than ever. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Piotti. The chair would like to remind members that they'll be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the meeting, and after that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. I appreciate the members' understanding with that. I would recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Coffey, clearly you're a very progressive sort of fella on your ranch, utilizing the resources and the programs that are available to us. Could you describe for me, and you've been in the process for a time, can you describe for me the availability of the technical assistance that comes from NRCS and the relevance that is to how you implement your conservation practices on your ranch?
Yes, sir. I appreciate that question. I have been involved with both EQIP and CSP contracts. In fact, I'm currently under a CSP contract right now. I'm into a renewal program with CSP. Many of the practices that we've used with the CSP program have included grazing management, which requires us to leave residual forage at 12 to 14 inches on an average of our pastures. We've added fencing for rotation grazing. We've added solar wells for water management. We are on a non-herbicide program. And so many of these conservation practices have made us more aware of the importance of the grasses that we have and leaving residual things behind for future use.
How available is the technical assistance? How much of a weight do you have when you need the good folks from the NRCS to work with you? Those kind of questions, even though this committee is focused on authorizing programs and our brethren on appropriations actually fund positions at USDA, nonetheless, it doesn't matter how good the programs are if you can't implement them, and you got to have people and technical experts to help, correct?
That is very true. Technical assistance is very hard to come by. They are inundated with paperwork, and I'm good friends with them and have served on committees with them through SRM and so forth, but it's very difficult to get them to come out on the land to do surveys and to assist. It seems like they're just inundated with the paperwork. If I had to choose between payments for cost share or these programs and technical assistance, I would honestly choose the technical assistance. I think we need more effort in that arena.
Question for the whole panel. This summer, former Secretary Vilsack heard comments from young and beginning farmers in Iowa about their concerns in competing rental rates, whether the land would go to a CRP contract or be available to rent. Part of this committee's responsibility is to preserve the soil, the water, and the air, but also to preserve our productive capacity and those young people and beginning farmers who represent that. Whoever in the panel, let's touch for a moment on this issue about if we get CRP rates too high, do we choke off farmers? By the same token, if we get CRP rates too low, which benefits a potential new farmer and expanding farmer, then we lose the conservation benefits. Let's touch on that for just a moment, that balance that I believe must be achieved. Whoever would care to step in my remaining couple of minutes.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps I'll start, and let me offer the thought that, first of all, one of the things that I remind you that we initially put into the CRP program were county-to-county limitations, being sensitive to that balance between agriculture and CRP lands. We've struggled with many farm bills on the CRP rental rate issue, and typically over its history, the rates have typically lagged behind, and we've had more issues with getting them competitive and raising them. Well, that turned a little bit with the skyrocketing land values, cash rents that we've seen. So all of a sudden, we've probably got a bit of the opposite situation now. So it is something we do need to revisit clearly. And I think there are ways that we can use kind of today's CRP, a little bit more of the targeted CRP, so that we can help beginning farmers and ranchers out there a little bit more, just because of some of the practices. That said, I think there's a real opportunity to help farmers and landowners right now. It's somewhat like the situation in the early 90s, not as dire, but you know, just because CRP is now a true resource program, soil, water, and wildlife, that doesn't mean that it also doesn't still have income security and stability benefits to it, price support, commodity supply control. Those are all elements of it because it is a true landscape level program. And those things are important right now in the situation that we're in with the agricultural economy.
Anyone else wish to touch on that? Mr. Coffey.
Thank you. Yes, you know, I'm kind of the opinion, I love the Working Lands program, and I think if we had more boots on the ground, we may not need to focus so much on set-aside land. I mean, conservation involves livestock, wildlife, soil, water, forages, on, and those can be blended together in a way that what's good for the goose is good for the gander, so to speak. So in my opinion, putting more funding to set aside, such as CRP, may not be in the best interest of the taxpayer in this country.
Seeing that my time has expired, I now recognize the gentlelady, Ms. Fudge, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would now yield to the ranking member of the full committee.
Gentlelady yields to the ranking member.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Peters and Mr. Gertson, you both mentioned this Duns-Sam situation. You know, a few years ago, I bought a little farm. And I think, you know, in a way, we ought to really require every member of this committee to own a farm. Because I've been now subjected to all of the different aspects of the farm programs. Right. But, you know, and I was in the CSP program. And I've got a partnership with my son. So we had to get these, one time the Duns number, that was not a big deal. But then, because we were a partnership and whatever this law was that we passed or guidance that was put out by OMB or whatever it was, and we had to have a SAMS number. Now, what ended up happening, because this, I guess because this stuff is public information, I get a call from somebody in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who tells me that I've got to go through him and it's going to cost me $600 to get this SAMS number, you know. And so they're scamming us, you know, like they do with the IRS and so forth. Not only is it bad enough you got to go through this, they're actually scamming people because you don't need to pay anybody to get this. But he basically told me I had to pay them to get this number. Well, I was only getting $700 a year out of the CSP in the first place, you know. So we got through that and so forth. But you know, I can't see any reason in the world why these farm programs are in this system in the first place. we've got the controls at the county level, and we know what's going on. So, would you agree with that we should just get rid of these impediments?
Absolutely, Congressman Peterson. Yeah, as I'm the guy on our farm who deals with NRCS, and yes, I'm the one who's personally gotten the DUNS number and the SAM number, and the DUNS number, yeah, that was no big deal, but I get solicitations through my DUNS number as well from people coming and wanting me to do stuff. The SAM number was a complete disaster. Yeah. I can tell you that. That was a 100% disaster. Right. Not only do I get tons of solicitations because my information's out there now, we had millions of dollars of payments held up because the NRCS offices weren't really even sure what to do or how to tell you to do it, right? So I got a lot of farmers around me who'd done their practices, right, installed hundreds of thousands of dollars of dirt work and pipelines and all of this stuff, paid it, right, paid their bills, now waiting on their cost share and couldn't get it, right, because they didn't sign up for the SAM number because they didn't know how or had to use the confusing website, right? So I can tell you from experience that the SAM system has been a complete disaster.
And I dropped out of CSP because of it. So my contract came up. They changed the practices, so it really wasn't hardly worth anything for me to go back into it. And I just wasn't going to go through it again, so I just dropped out. And I think there's a lot of people that have done that. Am I right, Mr. Peters?
That's correct. We would agree with you, and we've, through our districts, have heard countless stories similar to your own and Mr. Gertson's. We see this as an impediment to getting good conservation on the ground for people that are just seeking to do the right thing. And it was a system that was never intended for cost share recipients.
No, for defense contractors.
Correct.
Mr. Nomsen, your organization supports 40 million acres, am I right?
That's correct.
So who else supports it? I know the DNR guy in Minnesota is organizing all of the DNR people in that part of the world to support it. Are there other folks out there that are on board supporting the 40 million? Number one, and number two, are there people that are fighting you on that or that you know of?
Well, the latter part of your question is the easier one to answer. I think as we get started here in the process, I'm hopeful that many other groups will look to the CRP and the fact that we need a strong increase in the program. I don't know where the number's going to shake out for many groups, but to the earlier part of your question when you mentioned the DNR, one of the tools that we have available now that we have not had in previous Farm Bill discussions is we now have a national pheasant restoration plan that's put together by all of the state agencies. And in that plan, one of their goals is to support a 40 million acre CRP as one of the critical components of the national plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Kneel back, Mr. Chairman, and thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to members of the panel for your individual and your organization's leadership on conservation. Greatly appreciated. Mr. Piotti, an issue that we hear about is, that I hear about, is that there are some provisions in the easement program that make it more difficult for states like Pennsylvania who have established state easement programs to participate. Can you elaborate further on that?
Sure. Thank you for that question. The ASEP program is a great program, but it is very much a one-size-fits-all program as it's currently crafted, and there are a number of states like Pennsylvania who have developed very robust state-based farmland protection programs, and they usually, these state programs utilize ASEP funds as match. So you have to bring the requirements of the state program and the requirements of the federal program together and make a project happen. And that can be daunting. And we'd really love to see some refinements to the ASEP program so that states like Pennsylvania, who do a good job on their own, might be able to get access to the federal funds without jumping through quite so many hoops.
What, just to follow up on that, any specific refinements that you could recommend at this point?
Well, we've been talking to a number of other groups, land trusts around the country and the like, to get very specific as part of this farm bill. I can say right now there are just issues around some of the specific easement language that NRCS might dictate that might be a little different from what a state is looking for. There's frequently timing issues, as you can well imagine, trying to get the funds from both sources to work at the right time for a closing in an expeditious way. So there's timing issues. In some cases, there's retirement issues. Some cases, there's monitoring or baseline issues. And as I said, we're working with a group of land trust, ag land trust around the nation to bring some specific information to the use of the committee.
Great, I appreciate that very much. So this question is for whomever would like to respond. You know, often environmental groups point to regulations as the only way to achieve conservation results. And yet the work of NRCS has resulted in many, and specifically through voluntary conservation, I think it's resulted in a remarkable number of Endangered Species Act delistings. It's cleaned up wetlands and streams and conserved soil. In your opinion, why does voluntary conservation have such a better track record, and why do farmers rarely get credit?
So I guess voluntary is a big deal. You talk to any farmer or rancher for that matter, and we're pretty independent people, right? We don't like people intervening, you know, telling us what to do. I used to work for a company as an engineer for a year before I farmed. I could probably never go work for anybody again now. I've spoiled myself. I'm the boss, right? So voluntary conservation works well in our mindset. I mean, we're looking. You'll find almost every farmer and rancher is working hard to improve his program, improve his land, and natural resource conservation just comes naturally because that's what's required for them to even remain profitable, right? You can't farm and ranch and hand anything down to the next generation unless you are doing some sort of conservation, right? And so the voluntary, that I don't think that'll ever be an issue. You'll always be able to have people participate because it just comes natural to farmer and ranchers who are just, their mantra is doing more with less, right? That's how we have to survive.
Go ahead, Mr. Coffey.
Thank you. Many times I think where the problem is that when we start talking about mandatory, it ends up being single species specific. It's a pheasant, it's a monarch butterfly, it's a quail, it's a lesser prairie chicken, and that becomes the focus. And we can't see the forest for the trees at that point because we're staring at that one tree. Well, we as ranchers and farmers understand the entire realm of conservation. We understand the water, the soils, the forages, the crops, whatever it might be, and that's where our focus is. And it's interesting how we don't do anything for the monarch butterfly, but seasonally every year I can ride my horse along a creek and just be covered up in monarch butterflies when they fly through. And so I think too often the focus becomes too narrow in conservation programs.
So it seems like voluntary
Could become too narrow.
voluntary conservation truly is kind of a landscape approach.
Yes, sir.
With lots of benefits. Thank you, Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Ohio, Mrs. Fudge, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for being here. It's nice to be on a committee where people think that the federal government does something good, that there's some good programs. So thank you for that. We may think that they're too cumbersome, and they probably are. But I'm certainly hopeful that instead of just saying it's just onerous, too much paperwork, help us streamline the process. Because we do have some responsibility and accountability for tax dollars. We just can't give you money and say, have a great day. You know, we need for you to have some accountabilities, but we want to make the program better for you as well. So please do tell us what that is. To Mr. Piotti and to Mr. Peters, do you believe that the current Farm Bill conservation title provides adequate funding? And if it takes another hit in this Farm Bill, what do you think the consequences might be?
As my testimony indicated, I certainly do not feel that there's adequate funding right now for the programs. The last question about voluntary compliance, I think as an easy answer, because every farmer I've ever met wants to do what's right by the land. But there are a lot of steps that economically are hard to do without the support of some of these federal programs. So we absolutely need more. And what will happen if we don't get this support is we will not see the results on the ground that we want to see. We will not get the conservation impacts that we want. There will be impacts on water, there will be impacts on soil, and there will be impacts in the fairly near term on the economic viability of our farms. So it would both be environmentally and economically a bad move to not invest at the level that's needed.
Thank you, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And as I indicated in my testimony, we support maintaining or increasing funding in this next reauthorization. And the need for that is several-fold. One, we know that across the country, farm and ranch income is down, and it's increasingly difficult for the cost share investment to continue to flow forward with a low economy. So we have to continue the investment through the federal conservation programs. We know that landowners continue to want to do the right thing. We know that the pressure continues to be on the land in terms of water, soil, wildlife. If you look at the last Farm Bill, the conservation community, the agriculture community already gave a significant amount of funding. If we continue to cut into the programs, we're really going to be cutting into the bone, and we just can't afford to continue to turn landowners away when they're seeking tools to be able to do right on their land.
Thank you very much. Mr. Coffey, you've talked a couple of times about NRCS's staff on the ground and the difficulty they have. I mean, do you think that some of it might be just a morale problem because of how we fund it? You know, we've got continuing resolutions, we've got sequestration, we've got hiring freezes, we've got all of these things that make it difficult. Do you think that that might be part of the problem with the people on the ground?
I certainly won't disagree with that, but those that I tend to know have pretty good morale. But when I visit with them, their lack of morale is not. It tends to be with the paperwork, and it just seems to prevent them from getting out. I think they're highly educated people, and I think they are motivated, but they're struggling. So I don't think it's a morale issue solely.
Thank you. Mr. Peters, of course, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, right? So talk a little bit to me about urban farmers and what resources or what concerns they are facing.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So one of the items that we understand from our districts that urban conservationists are seeking right now is technical assistance. And we've been working through our districts to help identify those needs and to help meet those needs in the communities where urban agriculture is a priority. If you look at the landscape, the resource concerns are the same. We want to make sure that soil is healthy and that it's being prevented from erosion. We want to make sure that there are no unintended consequences to the water. We want to make sure that wildlife habitat is available. And all of those outcomes are achieved through sound conservation planning. So one of the things that we've identified as a need in the space of urban agriculture is strong technical assistance to make sure that those folks that are, again, seeking to do the right thing on their land have the resources available to do so.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, if you want to sell me a part of your farm, cheap, I'm in.
We'll invite you out to work on it first. With that, the gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now turns to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here today and discussing the future of our conservation programs. Many of you have stated in your testimony, and I would have to agree that our farmers are really the true stewards of our land. Each and every day, our farmers spend their livelihoods caring for our lands and preserving our natural resources for the generations to come. And it's good to hear that we got 5th generation and hopefully 6th and 7th and 8th generation farmers out there. You know, as the son of a farmer, I understand what we're, to a great extent, what we're talking about today, and the importance it is to the success of our farmers and ranchers, particularly in my home state of Georgia, which agriculture is the #1 industry. And of course, we're looking toward the next farm bill, and we've talked already today about the need to ensure that we have the tools and programs that will help us to potentially expand these programs and to make them successful. The best way I know to do that is, because I come from the business world, is to look at every dollar invested and what is the return on that dollar. You know, we represent the taxpayers, and the taxpayers expect us to use, and we should use their money as an investment return as far as conservation practices go. Mr. Peters, are there any actual statistics on what the, you know, for a dollar invested, what the dollar received from this program, which would help us to increase this in the next farm bill?
I'm sure there are. I don't have those statistics readily available with me this morning. One thing that I think bears mentioning is that historically, you know, for the federal investment through Farm Bill conservation programs, there is years upon years worth of cost share that have come out of the pockets of the farmers and ranchers and landowners that are participating in those programs.
Right.
That is a tremendous private investment that has leveraged those federal funds.
And that's important because everybody's got skin in the game, and
Yes, sir.
That is very important to our taxpayers out there. Mr. Piotti, you have any comments regarding?
Yes, I do. At the state level, and it was mentioned earlier that a lot of states have farmland protection programs that often work in companion with ASAP, and a number of states have done these kind of analyses, and I think we can compile some of that for you. I'll also point out the NCPP program. That's one of our better partnership programs. This has leveraged significant dollars outside of federal funding. And one of the requirements of that program is to identify the economic benefits of what's occurring. And that's happening, but to be honest, it's one of those places where the next Farm Bill needs some tweaks, because it's not, the quantification of those outcomes is not occurring at a level that it could. But that program, which is working, we think, very well, could be elevated to a level to not only do great work on the ground, but begin to provide some of the data that you're looking for.
And that's what we need in providing for these programs. The other thing is, as far as from this standpoint of the federal government, is the federal government the best place to do these programs? And of course, we talked about sharing. Everybody's got skin in the game. Would we be better served to do this possibly another way? Any comments on that, Mr. Peters?
Well, we feel like the conservation delivery system that is in place is effective and it does work. And that delivery system engages partners at the federal, the state, and the local level. And we feel like that has borne strong outcomes over the years. We feel like that is the way of the future.
Mr. Gertson, as far as flexibility of the program, do you believe that the federal government is flexible enough to deal with, you know, every day that I know that every day the farmer wakes up is a different day. How are they working out?
Yes, you know, I enjoy working with NRCS. They've worked as a good vehicle to administer programs. I share the same concerns as Mr. Coffey. The people are great, but quite often I find that they're overwhelmed,
yeah.
Right? That's the problem. I love working with the guys, and NRCS employees are a lot of times a lot like the farmers are, right? Especially your field reps who come out and do stuff and get along with them great. But yeah, there's a lot of time there's an information gap there. I'll know more about programs than they do, right? Because the information just hasn't disseminated down to them quick enough, right? So there's definitely possibly a staffing or information problem that could be there. And you'd asked about the I wanted to touch about whether the money was, how the money was being returned.
Investment return, yes, sir.
Right, okay, so our Rice and DU partnership, the RCPP program we've been running there is an excellent example of that. That was $25 million, and what I didn't mention is that there's been 25 million additional private dollars that have matched that for a total of 50 million. So that's matching every dollar that has been given into that program. And
Good.
One other thing I'd like to mention on that is that when you're looking at stretching a taxpayer dollar, right, I would point out, at least in my point of view, working lands programs go a long way, because that money isn't going to just the farmer, right? That money is going to me, and then I'm funneling it right back into the economy to pay for these practices, right? So, like in my community, it's not uncommon to see, you've got dirt movers sponsoring T-ball teams, or our pipeline guys, they're sponsoring dinners. I mean, it's all integrated. So money that's spent in working lands programs and EQIP and CSP, it multiplies and goes right back into the local economy.
Thank you. That's the kind of
Gentlemen,
information
time's
we need. I yield back the time I don't have.
The chair readily accepts it. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Waltz, for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the chairman, and I too would like to thank the chairman and the ranking member for starting out this Farm Bill process with this hearing. I think for many of us in this room, we should feel proud of the last Farm Bill and the conservation title that was in it, that was wildly heralded across the spectrum as being in the right direction. And now we come back and we improve upon those things. And being a very literal Minnesotan, I know that the chairman had a big presence in that, as he sits over this room with the big photo and will be there again. And so I would come back to this. My friends, I think, are making a very good point of this return on the investment, trying to understand the bigger picture, understanding how there are win-win-wins involved in this, and seeing a table like this is exactly where it's at. Over the last few years of having the privilege of being the co-chair on the Sportsman's Caucus, we took it upon ourselves to quantify outdoor activities, what they mean, and what they mean for this economy. The numbers we came to are about $650 billion. So when you take care of the environment and you have places for people to be able to fish or to hunt or to mountain bike or to take their Polaris out where they're doing the things they're doing, all of those peripheral issues have a huge impact. And to get a sense of that, that's bigger than the pharmaceutical and auto industry combined. And couple that with ag, that's the power of rural America, and it's working with the coalitions that are here. And I agree, where we can do working lands conservation, those are win-wins. But we have a broad suite of things that we can do that fill all of those niches. So I again, and I've seen this, a $900,000 investment in EQIP on a spring feedlot near a trout farm in a trout stream in southeast Minnesota. That trout stream now generates over $4 million in income to that local community from that investment. And that cattleman is also running more people on that land in a more responsible manner. That's a win-win-win for everybody involved. So I do think we approach this from that perspective, that we can get this out of it. And when we're doing things like CRP, they are not just taking land out of production, which we need to make sure that we're compensating people fairly. There is also a return to the economy on that. So I wanted to follow up, Mr. Nomsen. You mentioned the pheasant plan. I know Minnesota's pheasant plans, and yes, I will, in full disclosure on this, I am very glad there's more pheasants, because my odds increase of getting one now when we're out there. And I had the pleasure of, with Mr. Peterson, of seeing him get one, as we both got one. They're coming back. Tell me how the Minnesota pheasant plan fits together with what we're doing federally to make sure, as they set target numbers, what are we going to have to do so they get the targets?
Well, thank you for the question, and specifically to the Minnesota state pheasant plan, there's a short-term goal of a harvest of about 450,000 birds. We've got a ways to go to get to that. We're probably around 300,000 or so right now. So our estimates are that would take probably another 600,000 or 700,000 acres of land in pheasant-friendly types of habitats. Not all CRP, probably a combination of CRP plus perhaps grassy habitats provided by small grains If for some reason we saw an increase in small grain plantings in Minnesota, very, very wildlife-friendly plantings. And so it's a combination of all of those things. And just to add to your discussion on economics that you're all having, there's no question that the conservation programs have been incredibly successful, not only for that individual farmer and landowner, but frankly for all Americans. If we're doing CRP in Ohio or Minnesota, and maybe the driver is some quail or a few more pheasants or monarch butterflies, that project is helping benefit hypoxia situation in the Gulf and nutrient runoff and things that all Americans find important. So these conservation programs are vitally important to all of us.
Mr. Nomsen, is it possible, like when we have drought situation of this CRP, and I know we had this in Minnesota with the hay shortage, and we're shipping hay up from Texas and wherever we could get it, is there a responsible way that you can have CRP land and haze and graze that for these folks? Can we do that?
Absolutely, and I was chatting with my colleague, Mr. Coffey, earlier, and we were talking about what's good for the herd is good for the bird.
Yeah.
And yes, absolutely. CRP does have a managed haying grazing component to it. Frankly, it's the entire CRP management issue is one that needs to be revisited. We need to get the agricultural community and the producers, the environmental groups, the conservation groups at the table to evaluate where it's at, how can we do a better job, and how can we encourage the land management in a very, very farm and ranch friendly way.
I'd like to work with you on it because I think that's a key of making sure we have those people at the table, and so when it gets tough, makes it easy for them to get on there and graze. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes a farmer from California, Mr. LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All apologies for the multiple committee schedule today for my tardiness, but thank you for your recognition. I'll jump right into it. As a rice farmer from California, I wanted to speak with, well, good morning, Mr. Gertson. Maybe I talk to you for a moment here. So, as you know, we're medium grain growers primarily out there, and likewise, growers in my area have seen the program of EQIP as a very important tool with water-saving practices. We don't need to save a lot of water right now in California, but it's always either feast or famine. And so it is an ongoing issue with water savings being a good tool, as well as shorebirds, water birds. And so in your statement, which I'm sure you made earlier, that the EQIP 3-year limit provision does hamper the long-term effectiveness of these practices for shorebirds, for habitat, for water savings, all the other benefits that the program has shown for growers in my state and yours. So would you just a little more detail on what changes you would see regarding maybe the 3-year limit provision or other areas?
Sure. Yes, we would support extending the life of EQIP contracts. I mean, from a point of view of a farmer, conservation is for life, I guess, for us. I mean, this isn't a 3-year deal, right? I mean, we're in it for the long haul.
How many years have you been on your place?
I'm sorry?
You're a 5th generation. How many years?
I'm 5th generation, 108.
108. Wow. Okay, we're going on 86. We're raising the 5th.
Yeah, I've got the 6th coming. I've got 3 boys who are coming behind me, and so yeah, I mean, I think that's the right. Without conservation, we definitely wouldn't have been there 108 years, right? I mean, these programs are what are going to make farming and ranching available to the next generation. Not only are they conserving the environment, but they're also it's a win-win, as you guys are liking to say, because they're also cutting our costs, right? And with farming, we're always constantly having to, cut back wherever we can. We're always having to do more with less.
We're not price makers, we're price takers.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So what would you see as the, what kind of term instead of 3 years? Open-ended? What kind of number do you think you've been hearing or would actually be practical?
I don't know that I can answer that right off the cuff.
Well, I'm sure we'll figure it out here.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me switch. Thank you, Mr. Gertson. Good morning, Mr. Coffey.
Thank you.
I feel like Joe DiMaggio there for a second, but If you're over 40, you'll get that. Your issue from being a cattle rancher in Oklahoma, there are many technical fixes that Congress needs to make to equip to make it work better for farmers and ranchers. So what technical problem do you find you're running into in ranching in the Midwest there with the...
Thank you. To begin with, the physical technical problem, I believe, is not having enough boots on the ground, not having enough trained conservationists within RCS that had the time to come out and be on the ground. Now, there's other technical issues.
What kind of timeline to get from maybe your first request or first ask to, boots in your field?
The only boot I've ever had on my place, either they were touring it and it was a training session and we were training in RCS personnel, has been to follow up on an EQIP contract to make sure that we performed according to the worksheet. So beyond that,
is it just based more on trust? You go in and do the forms at the NRCS office, and more or less that's the end of the
and then you
verification?
go home, follow the worksheets, and accomplish the goals, yes.
And do they have a pretty big inbox that you're at the bottom of sometimes on their work, you think?
Well,
I mean,
I don't know how big their inbox is.
Well, you know what I'm saying. Does it feel like a big, like it takes a while for you?
I just know they're, and
Or
it
for
may
your
be
neighbors.
that they trust me, they know me well enough so they don't, feel that I'm the biggest priority in the area. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, that's good. Yeah, it's nice to have an honor going. There's one other thing that hadn't been talked about in committee today on this topic. What would you put in there since my time's running out? What's been left out, you think?
I would look at increasing the conservation strategies. I would look to make them more adaptive and flexible by region, and then increase the accountability, both on the side of USDA and the producer.
It's a little rigid by region. You might have to one size fits all amongst regions.
Yes, sir. Worksheets are developed in Washington, sent out to the state cons, and then those are, but if we had more worksheets, more things by region, I think we could accomplish more of our goals.
So Washington is coming from Washington. Maybe we should put that office in like Tulsa, huh?
Yeah, bring it on. Yeah,
I agree.
Davis, Oklahoma is a nice place to live right there in Murray County.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Coffey.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now turns to the gentlelady from New Hampshire. Ms. Custer for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to Representative Fudge and yourself, thank you for hosting this important discussion about conservation programs. I come from the Northeast, New Hampshire, where we have smaller farms than all of you, but the conservation programs are incredibly important. And I just want to echo my colleagues' comments about the impact of the outdoor community. The conservation in New Hampshire also leads to a great resurgence in agritourism, and I think our colleague from Maine spoke about this. We're very proud to have a 5% increase in the number of new farmers in New Hampshire, and we've got a renewed interest in healthy foods and organics and farmers markets, and really a resurgence in being closer to our food. So I appreciate all the work you've done. Our chair, Representative Peterson, stole my thunder. Thank you to both of our witnesses, Mr. McDaniel and Mr. Gertson, for pointing out my legislation, H.R. 1163, Improving Access to Farm Conservation Act, that talks about this Sam's Duns problem. I look forward to having my colleagues in the committee join. It's a bipartisan bill, and I think we can all agree the underlying law was not intended for farmers working with their son or their brother or sister, as it may be. And so we'll move forward with that and try to at least alleviate that burden of paperwork that you've been experiencing. I want to focus in. I have a bigger concern, and we'll know more tonight, but I'm worried about the cuts in the budget across the board. We've talked, the president has talked about $1 trillion in infrastructure funding, an $800 million wall. Today and yesterday, a 10% increase in defense budgets. I'm concerned that these are the kinds of programs that are just going to get wiped off the map. And I guess I'm glad this is such a congenial bipartisan hearing, because I hope as we move forward with the Farm Bill, we'll be able to keep this funding, because it is important both for the agricultural community, for our outdoor economy, for our environment. And I just wondered if any of you have any comments on how we can come together in a bipartisan way to make sure that we keep the funding for conservation programs.
I'll offer one thought, plant the seed if you haven't already been planted it with you, and that is that I view farming and farmland as being critical infrastructure. And I think there's value in thinking about it that way. And the conservation programs that undergird those activities are also part of that infrastructure. So maybe there's an opportunity to turn the debate around a little, and as we're thinking about rural infrastructure, focusing more attention on agriculture.
That's creative. I like that. Thank you very much. That's a great idea. Any others? That's brilliant, by the way. If they're going to spend $1 trillion, let's make sure we're included.
Exactly. I'd like to add to that just briefly in that we do need to take a hard look at return on investment in the discussion that we had. From my chair, the starting point is, what are the resource needs out there? What do we need on the landscape? And that should be the starting point for the discussion. And yes, I recognize it likely is going to get much more challenging as we start to talk about money available and making sure that we prioritize and fund the best of the best. That's why we need to look internally at even all of our programs and find efficiencies and savings so that we can put more acres out there on the ground for farmers and landowners and for everyone.
And can you show that return on investment? You have that kind of analysis of the programs?
I think we do, and I actually made a note when you had a discussion earlier, and one of the things that we will add to our testimony are some of the studies that have looked at individual conservation programs in terms of their efficiencies and what are they providing to taxpayers.
I think that information would be very helpful for the committee, because in a bipartisan way, we will need to sell this to our colleagues, that this is important spending, and that's not going to be, popular this cycle. So I appreciate that. Anybody else?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. I would say we've also talked a lot this morning about capacity at the local level. And one of the things that we need to make sure that we address is that as we're looking at the delivery of financial assistance, that there is strong conservation planning at the beginning of that process. Having a strong plan in place, making sure that the appropriate resource concerns are being addressed, and that the landowner is in the management seat in the development of that conservation plan will help us achieve the greatest outcomes with the federal investment, both in financial assistance and technical assistance.
Well, thank you. My time is up, but if anybody has any other suggestions, we're going to need them to get this done and to sell it to our colleagues on the floor. Thanks very much.
Gentlelady's time's expired. She's yielded back. Before we adjourn, I invite the ranking member to make any closing remarks that she would be care to.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. We appreciate your testimony, and certainly we will take it under advisement. I think that we're going to have a tough battle, but we're ready for the fight. Thank you so much.
The ranking member yields back. I would just simply note to my colleagues on the committee, and for that matter, the witnesses, many very important topics have come up today. We do face a struggle as we march forward. We have a great deal of uncertainty on what the funding issues will be, the lay of the land, but I'm confident in the full committee chairman, the full ranking member. And I would note for the record, the process of trying to evaluate conservation takes many things into consideration. Whether it's issues so simple as other programs within our jurisdiction, like the upstream flood control dams, where you can calculate the amount of property and lives protected, or, as in the case with CRP, how many tons of soil remain in place, don't enter the water stream, don't move downstream, don't affect dams and structures. There's the value of enhanced wildlife, whether you're a sportsman, a bird lover, with a hook or a bullet or a camera, so to speak, there's value in that. So all of these things factor in. But ultimately, we have to remember, in so many of these programs, we're talking about making investments that are not financially practical for an individual producer to make and achieve a return in a 3 to 5 to 7 to 10-year period. We are making investments that are for a generation or generations or hundreds of years, and we need to assess that in our calculations. We are investing in the future forever. And with that, I look forward to the work of this subcommittee and the work of the full committee. And under the rules of the committee, the record for today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional information and supplementary written responses from witnesses to any question posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry is adjourned.